Greetings. Good evening. Welcome to the gutter. Everyone ends up here eventually. It's only a matter of time. Tonight, from the dawn of man, or at least somewhere after the oceans drank Atlantis and the rise of the sons of Ares, there was an explosion of the swords and sandals genre. And while not as popular as the more well known sword and sorcery genre that was explicitly shown in the pulp magazines of the 1930s, the history of this genre goes a little bit deeper than even those Halcyon days. It goes back to an age almost forgotten, save for those brave souls who scout the used bookshops, lost cinema DVDs, and occasionally, as we might get into, the back issue bins of comic shops. What started then and what continues now to a lesser degree owns its very memory to really a 10-year period of time, the mid 50s to the mid 60s, an era itself that offers a nostalgic glimpse of what was or what could be, specifically to the Italian film genre or grouping known as peplum. To join us on a journey, our mutual guide and trusted narrator, if you will, who has joined me this evening is none other than the current, what I would say, the current torch carrier for the lofty memory of pulp magazines in particular. Whether he accepts that crown or not doesn't really matter to me. He's got it. So the one, the only Alex of Cervosa, thank you for joining me this evening. I've been really looking forward to this exchange, my friend.
Hey, yeah, great. Thank you for the introduction. I will try to live up to it.
Well, if we can't, do a little bit of self-aggrandizement, what are we here for? But if we can, let's greet some chat. We've got quite a little crowd gathering here. We got Citizen Ronan. Hello from the gutter. Good to see you, sir. The Art and Times of Jay Ryan. Hello, Gutter, my old friend. Have you come to listen to us again? P. Alexander.
That's me.
That's you. Eric DeGuapo. Gutter, I barely knew her. That's like 4 weeks in a row with a good line, man. Congratulations. Got I'm gonna butcher that. Raleigh Nazani. Hi, don't know how long I'll stay though. Good to have you here, my friend. Our good friend Eric Grant. Good to see you, sir. Jeffro Johnson is going to sleep because of my 1.5 minute intro. I apologize, sir. Belmont Press. Good to see you, sir. And it looks like we've got the one, the only nefarious Hail Gutter Rats. Good to see you, sir. So yeah, with that out of the way, and this won't be the last time we visit the chat, I promise. I'm not one of those hosts that ignores you completely. Although, yeah, I'm going to be pretty focused on my guest here because like I said, have been looking forward to this. And I invited Alex on because, number one, I own a couple copies of his magazine, and I think it's awesome. And if you go down to the description, there's a link for his website where you can pick up a copy, or you can go to Amazon and look for it. There's also a link for the Mighty Sons of Hercules. It's currently in sign up on Kickstarter that he's involved in. So I'd appreciate you guys all checking those two things out. I guess where do you want to start off here? You want to kind of just start off with the early Italian cinema, the peplum, and kind of go from there?
Yeah,
You know
I
what?
mean, the with the concept of the strong man as the superhero. I mean, everybody is really big about superhero stuff these days. I mean, we're going on 2 decades now of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Freaking every movie out there is a superhero movie, or it's not playing in theaters, or nobody's going to see it in theaters. But when people think about, like, the golden age of superheroes going back to the beginning, a lot of people think of the characters, like Superman, Captain Marvel, who made their debut in the 30s. And you'll get the hipsters who will be like, oh well, there's also the Shadow and the Phantom, even though they're not really so much superheroes. They're kind of costumed, masked vigilantes, and the masked detective, the masked hero. They kind of come more from the Zorro tradition. But those big, strong superheroes, the guys who weren't wearing masks in the 30s, guys like Superman and Captain Marvel, those go back to the tradition of the circus strongman and the wrestler. You had these big ripped guys who would, they lift huge barbells, like lift a chair with somebody sitting on it over their head. They do crazy wrestling feats. Someone would wrestle with animals, and that was the coolest thing. People love that, and that's where that's tradition of the superhero comes from. And so, what a lot of people might not know is the first really big superhero franchise that took cinema by storm was an Italian character named Maciste. Now, the weird thing about this is he starts out as this minor character in this historical epic that's put together by Gabriele D'Annunzio called Cabiria. It's this movie about the Punic War, this girl who gets kidnapped by the Phoenicians. They're going to sacrifice her to Moloch. And you got this Roman guy who's trying to rescue her, and he's got this loyal slave companion who's Machiste. And a real funny thing about this is in the first ever Machiste movie, Machiste is supposed to be black. He's kind of in blackface.
Well, he starts
So
off. He's the lead protagonist's slave, essentially.
yeah. I mean, he's the sidekick, but everybody loved this character so much. He became this huge breakout star from this historical epic from 1914. And so, like, what do you do though? I mean, are you going to have more movies about this slave from the Punic Wars, or are what are you going to do? So the second Machiste movie has this crazy setup. It takes place in contemporary Italy. You've got this lady who's being chased down by these mob goons, and she's running away from them. And while she's running, she ducks into this theater to hide from them. The theater is playing, of all things, Cabiria. She sees the footage of Batiste bending the bars in that one scene in Cabiria, and she's like, "That's the guy who's gonna save me." But what she does is she tracks down the actor who in this movie is Machiste. You got Machiste, the actor, playing Machiste in Cabiria, and she's like, "You're the only one who can save me." And so, what ends up happening is, you got this long series of Buster Keaton style action, physical comedy hijinks. Well, you got this strong man performing crazy feats of strength and dexterity and beating up goons who are chasing this lady. And that kind of sets the tone of Machiste, the superhero, as opposed to the character from the costumed epics.
For sure. Well, and
And
that started a whole series of films too, because I mean that's
yeah, you end up by the late 20s, they've made nearly 30 of these silent films, and they take place all throughout time. Most of them are modern and contemporary, some of them are set in the past. You have one that's kind of a spoof on Dante's Inferno that's got just amazing special effects, even by today's standards. The original Machiste in Hell is just a phenomenal film that I recommend anybody watch. So by 1927, I think they've got like 27 or 28 Machiste films out, including Cabiria, and that's before several of those characters that everybody looks back on and thinks of as, like, the first superheroes that even made their debut. If
for sure.
anything,
Well,
his main contemporary is probably Zorro. So you have the Zorro tradition of the masked crime fighter, crime solver, and then on the other side you have the strong man who he saves the day with his feats of strength and heroism.
right. No, and I think that's a great parallel, those two characters, because they are kind of the the source of so much draws off. As you said, if you look at like the Spider or the Shadow, the Green Hornet, and they draw more off the Zorro tradition, whereas you've got Doc Savage and Superman and Captain Marvel drawing, or Shazam as we call him today, drawing more off of the Makiste tradition of the strong man and the
Yeah.
brute
And I
strength
would I
being
would
the
not I would not explicitly say that these characters, were based on or inspired by Machiste, but they come from that same tradition of the circus strongman
right.
who,
No, I mean the only time on this show that we talk about anything being like a direct copy is when we talk about Bob Kane ripping off the Shadow word for word when he created Batman. And hat tip to if he's out there listening to the show, my good friend Michael, who's the president of the Bob Kane Appreciation Society. But one of the you mentioned Cabiria, and Cabiria is really fascinating because, like you said, it kind of launched this career and up from the mid-teens up through the 20s. Just a huge series of films were made, and then it kind of died down for a little bit. They just didn't make movies for a little bit, but in 1943. Cabiria was adapted for Italian newspapers as a comic. It was illustrated by Raffaele Paperia and Antonio Canali. And unfortunately, I could not find any actual Italian copies of this comic, primarily due to the fact that there was this thing going on in the world in 1943, and I'm guessing most copies were destroyed. However, from 45 to 46, it did run in a Turkish paper. It was called 1001 Romans, and we do have some stills. And these stills are just fantastic for the level of detail. It harkens back to a few
Yeah,
shows ago.
that looks just like Pagano.
Well, and that's the thing. These are like almost shot for shots out of the movie. It's really scary how accurate it is. In fact, here is a still from the movie of one of the temples, and here's the same shot from the actual comic. So they did a really good job of the adaptation to the series. And then, of course, the famous scene of the elephants of Hannibal crossing the Alps. Like you said, it was set during the Punic Wars. So, but yeah, this was a really cool find, and it just hit the art has definitely that same air of what we were kind of talking about a few weeks ago with Odin Dasko when we were going through Hal Foster's body of work. So you've got that's in the 40s, and then you kind of have another lull, and then Peplum starts, and this Peplum movement is Sword and Sandals. It's kind of in direct contrast to the more widely known Sword and Sorcery, Sword and Sandals epics. They're grounded with like I don't know, would probably like a traditional like ancient class Bronze Age setting.
Yeah, usually either Bronze Age or Roman Empire period, because in the 50s, the early 50s, you sort of started to see the rise of the costume epic, the historical stuff that would either be set in ancient Egypt or up through ancient Rome. A lot of them tended to be religious films or, based on period novels. Ironically, there's this weird sense of continuity between the Egyptian and the Ten Commandments, because apparently the Ten Commandments used a lot of the sets and costumes and props that were left over from the Egyptian, which was based on the Mika Waltari novel that came out a couple years earlier.
Okay.
So you had this real big boom of historical flicks that were these big grandiose costume epics, whether they were ancient Egypt, ancient Rome, time of Christ, biblical stories, historical stuff. There was a lot of big money and big budget films being made all over the world. What
Gotcha.
ends up happening though is by the late 50s, I think 57 or 58, there was this really cool big budget adaptation of The Legend of Hercules that was mixed up with The Legend of the Argonauts. And they got this world famous bodybuilder, Steve Reeves, to play the role of Hercules. And this thing was huge. This thing was a phenomenon.
No, I don't even think that goes far enough. And this is Mr. Reeves in character. Kind of, you mentioned Jason and the Argonauts. There's also a little bit of Samson in there too. With
Yeah, yeah, of course. Of
but
course.
this was even predating 1958's Hercules with Steve Reeves. The strong man was always front and center in these Papillon
Yeah,
films.
because by the late 40s and 50s, you were starting to see the rise of the bodybuilder becoming superstars in their own right. I mean, you of course had Charles Atlas, who had his commercials in the back of every pulp magazine and comic of
Oh,
how
for
to
sure.
get the Charles Atlas resistance method to get a better body in however many days.
Right. And you know, even how Reeves even came into the film is interesting because Pietro Francischini, who made the movie, he'd been wanting to make a Hercules film for years, but he was always frustrated because he could never find an actor that he felt represented what Hercules meant. Both in like it just in stature, because it's such an imposing figure. You've got to have a guy that just, you know, really stands out on screen, and he found people that were tall enough and big enough, but they didn't have the presence or they couldn't act, which is kind of funny that they settled on Steve Reeves. But it, but his daughter ended up pointing out Steve Reeves in another movie, and they screen tested him, and just the gravitas that he had on film just sold him, and so that's how he got cast, based purely on just this imposing visage that he could present. And he wasn't half bad. I mean, people like to mock his acting, but it's not half bad given the
I,
quality
I
of
mean,
films that
he
they are.
it, it's physical acting. The physicality is a huge and important part of movies like this, because you know you got to be able to sell that you're not bending, you know, a rubber bar or a rubber brassiere. You have to be able to make it actually look like you're performing these huge, massive feats of strength. And you know that's when you combine that with the property effects, you know, you can end up with these really cool, believable scenes on relatively shoestring budgets of
Oh,
cool
absolutely.
action and super heroics. You know, you didn't need all the CGI computers, weird special effects and stuff to have superheroes on the screen and have them look good.
No, and I mean, similar to what Peter Jackson did in Lord of the Rings to make the hobbits look small. One of the things that Francis did was Reeves stood 6'1", a very tall and imposing 6'1". This man was cut, and he would cast shorter Italian men around him so that he looked
Manlet
even big.
Ulysses.
Yeah. So
One of the best parts of both those Steve Reeves movies is they've got like manlet young Ulysses as his sidekick.
for sure. So yeah, I mean those are great. I love those films. And you know, earlier this week when we were talking, I really keyed in on that. That you mentioned those that you appreciate them as well. I mean, they're right up there with like the, you know, Jason and the Argonauts and all that. But they've always stood apart, just because of how much they seem more fun, man. Almost like just everybody's having a ball making them. But I do want to make one statement too. If you go out and you type into Google peplum, be careful what you're reading, because peplum also refers to the disastrous series of films that came out after 1982, Conan's the Barbarian. The Italian cinema has a habit of just grasping a hold of anything that's successful and xeroxing it until it becomes a pale imitation. So there are a whole series of films from the early 80s that are technically peplum, but they're extremely gritty, grimy. They're sleazy. They're just not nearly as nice as the ones
Yeah,
that we're talking
yeah.
about from the 50s and the 60s. So just to
Like
clarify
these
that.
are yeah, the ones from the 50s and 60s are the stuff that like, you know, you'd let your kids watch on Saturday mornings. I mean, they were still running those like is when I was growing up, like on TBS and TNT, and that was the early 90s. They were still showing them.
Oh yeah, I'm the same way, man. And I think the first time I ever saw a Steve Reeves Hercules, it was actually on MST3K. Joel and the robots were mocking it, and I was like, "Damn, this is actually a pretty good movie." And so I
Yeah,
went out
yeah.
and found it
Probably
myself and watched it.
the most well-known Machiste movie is Mole Men Against the Son of Hercules because it was on MST3K. And you know,
Oh, there you go.
if you can forgive the fact that the entire movie is shot day for night with bright ass sunlight, I mean it's such a great fun film. It's one of the best ones.
For sure. Well, now, so kind of having set the table, so to speak, on where that sword and sandals kind of how it came about and a little bit of the history. You had mentioned one book in particular, one comic that you really wanted to talk about that all of this leads to, really, and that was Gold Keys, Mighty Samson.
Yeah, yeah. So in the midst of the peplum boom with the Machiste movies that were coming out in the US, because they were showing the Machiste movies in the US by the early 60s, even though a lot of the times they would change his name. They There was this Gold Key comic launched called Mighty Samson, and the premise is basically a peplum hero in post-apocalyptic New York fighting these mutants, trying to rescue the tribes of scattered humans who are living in the wreckage of old New York. And it's just the most fantastic stuff you can ever get your hands on. It's not easy to find, but if you can, just check it out. It is some of the coolest stuff.
No, and we just for a little bit of background on it. So, two episodes ago, we spoke a little bit about the underground and the independent comics response to what happened when the Comics Code Authority was established. Um, as a minor footnote in there, I did mention what Dell's response was, and Dell's response was to ignore the Comics Code and just say Dell makes good comics. Dell at the time was just a distributor. They distributed comics explicitly for Western publications. When Western and Dell decided to go their separate ways in the early '60s, Western rebranded as Gold Key and continued not following the Comics Code because they were associated still with Dell. So they had that kind of cover over them. So you won't see a CCA stamp on any of these issues as we're going through Mighty Samson. They did have a couple of huge coups, though, when they launched Mighty Samson. Issues 1 through 6 feature Frank Thorne. Frank Thorne is known by most for obviously the 19, and this is Frank. Well, I'll get into what Frank did a little bit. I'm just going to touch on it. But Frank is most widely known for drawing Red Sonja for Marvel. However, in another tie in, going back to talking about Hal Foster and the start of the comic strips, Thorne started his career in '48 working for Standard Comics, and he almost exclusively penciled on romance stories. He moved over to Perry Mason, and then he jumped over to King Features' bigger sellers. And he was a penciler and an inker on Alex Raymond's Flash Gordon. But more importantly, he worked on Jungle Jim. Now, Jungle Jim, it's I would say it's a crossover between kind of where we were talking about before, the Zorro, the intelligent and agile and dexterous who's able to fight, that bore out the Shadow and the Spider and Batman, versus the Makiste who, kind of bore out from Samson and Hercules and goes to
And
Superman and Shazam
Tarzan.
and Tarzan.
Yeah, we really can't forget about Tarzan in the mix,
Absolutely.
because Western also had the license for Tarzan for a couple decades.
Indeed, and I didn't bring any of that up because if I start talking about Tarzan, we're gonna go down a
Wow,
rabbit
that's a
hole, but
whole other rabbit hole.
for sure. But so Jungle Jim's like kind of right in the middle. He's an adventurer. He's smart, but he's still strong. He's in that Doc Savage vein of just kind of the adventure. Johnny Quest's dad would be another one that's kind of in that same vein of kind of style. And where this goes is obviously that merger of the two gets you like eventually James Bond in the '60s when Ian Fleming's creating that character. But so that's kind of the background. Now, I just want to go back to this real quick. Why is Frank Thorne standing with a cosplay girl dressed as Red Sonja? This is what Frank was, a brilliant marketer, and this is how he put Red Sonja on the map. He would always be surrounded by beautiful women dressed as his characters. And when he went out to cons or did signing events, so that really helped Red Sonja sell along. But so he did a couple of the issues, and then it moved on to a couple other artists, and it jumps around. But one thing that was fairly consistent across the whole run, and I did post this one earlier. This is actually the first issue, and then we can show some of the other covers here. And as you'll see on all these covers, they are gorgeous paintings. They're absolutely striking and beautiful.
Yeah,
Um,
for all of their serious comics, Gold Key was all about the painted covers. They usually had the drawn toon covers and stuff for their toon books that were licensed either from Warner Brothers or Disney. But for any of their stuff that was based on live action shows or licensed properties like Tarzan, Korak, or their original stuff, they always went for those beautiful painted covers. And Mighty Samson, Turok, Son of Stone, up through like
Dr.
Darkest Hour of
Solar.
the 70s, Doc
Yep.
Solar, yes. Magnus Robot Fighter,
Oh
which
man, can't
is
forget Magnus.
basically what if we took a Batiste type character and put him in the far future fighting robots.
For sure. No, and that's the great part about these. They and it's a shame because a lot of these issues didn't sell very well. Mighty Samson it did run for a full 32 issues, but that run consists really of 20 issues from 64 to 68 and then 12 issues from 68 to 82,
Yeah,
mostly
they went
reprints.
quarterly on a lot of those
Yeah.
titles, if I recall.
So it is a shame that we didn't get more. But so these beautiful cover paintings were the work of Mo Gallup. And Mo Gallup was a fantastic painter. He did paperback covers, paintings for paperbacks. He did paintings for sets and mats for magazines. But he's phenomenal work. Definitely check him out. I'm going to keep on moving here, but he's definitely worth noting because his work on these in particular is just striking. Um, as Alex said, it's set in a post-apocalyptic world in New York. They don't call it New York; it's New York. Um, just because
Like in
I don't
Gundam.
know. But yeah, and you get these crazy creatures. If you see there, he's got a bandage over an eye because he loses an eye in a fight with a lion bear, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's half lion, half bear. The monkeys have like 8 arms and appendages going everywhere, and it's just crazy, man. It's really wild too because if you get into this is in the '60s, and they've got like spaceships and stuff, and they're shooting down satellites, and it's all over the place and just a ton of fun. When Alex said it's a ton of fun, it's a ton of fun. It's just a really fun book, and you can hand this to anybody, man. You can hand it to an 8-year-old all the way up to an adult, and they'll enjoy it because the pictures are fun, the action's engaging, and the stories are actually shockingly well written.
Yeah, the only tricky part is you don't find a lot of them in the wild, and a lot of times they'll be kind of overpriced because these comics are so good, you're going to want to read them. You're going to want to find affordable beater copies so you can sit back and actually enjoy them. These aren't like, oh, I'm going to stick this in my box and, have it as an investment because, they're never going to appreciate and value to the point where they would be investor comics, but they always get priced just, a little high for just, casual something checking out something new. And that's something that actually kind of kept me away from a lot of the Silver Age Gold Key stuff for a while, is because I was like, if I get into this and find out I like it, it's going to be so hard to track some of these down, especially like some of the Turok ones.
Right. Well, and for most of the books in this era, whether you're from the 64 gold key stuff on, from about 64 to 68, what you're looking for is a reader copy, which is going to be like a CGC quality grade of like a 2 to a 4, anywhere from like $3 to $5 for that low of a quality. Anything
Yeah.
higher than that's going to go
Ba-
astronomical, and
yeah.
you're
Basically,
not going to
what you
find
need.
much higher than a 4.
Basically what you need to do is go on eBay, find people who are selling them in lots. You can get them at a really good price. I mean, I got a complete run of Dagar a while back for like $80.
Hmm.
I got like a stack of 20 Mighty Samsons, not quite a complete run for like $70.
Yep, and this also has this book runs into something that I've talked about a couple of times, but I want to highlight it here, and that's the early issues are actually easier to find, and it's because the print runs were higher. The deeper this
Yeah.
goes towards that issue 20, issue 18, 19, and 20 are the 3 hardest to find, and if you do find them, they're going to be a little bit pricier. And when I say that, for like I said, that 2 to 4 grade, for a really rough cover, you're talking not quite detached covers, but we're close. You're looking at like 10 to 15 is going to be standard market going rate. They're not impossible to find by any means, but they're not priced. When you pick them up, you're going to be kind of shocked based off the condition on what you're going to have to pay for those issues in particular. I still recommend them. They're great buys. You can find places on the internet where these have been uploaded. If you'd like that link, just DM me on Twitter, and I will accidentally make sure that you find your way there.
Yeah, I have no problem with sharing scans of stuff like this, because they're so hard to actually find in the wild. A lot of places, I go to cons and ask for them, and the sellers will be like, "Oh, I didn't bring any of my golden key stuff because nobody ever asks for them."
Right. I know when I was completing my Doc Solar run, it took me about 3 years because at 1 year I just had to go to cons and remind all the dealers like, "Hey, I'm looking for this," and then I had to wait for the cycle to start again so that they'd bring it next time.
Yeah.
And then I got deals because, like, man, they wanted to move it because, "Oh, I've been sitting on these books for 2 years." It's like, "Well, now negotiations are open." You shouldn't have said that, but so kinda talking about that, I mean, that's one of the things, right? We look for this because we love it. We love the art, we love the stories. There's something about these that really resonate with us. Now, you didn't run out and make a comic book, but what you did do is you went out and made a magazine for the stories that really resonated with you. You wanna talk a little bit about that process?
Yeah, so, several years back, uh, Cirsova used to actually be a Dungeons& and Dragons blog. We talked about some setting stuff, but we mostly ended up delving into mechanics.
Okay, so
Now,
nerd I'm gonna stop you there. I just got a nerd question for you. What was your edition of D&D?
uh, mostly I gravitated towards BX, the basic expert set.
Nice, nice. All right, continue.
But anyway, Jeffro Johnson, who is here in the chat, was doing a deep dive in the Appendix N literature that was inspiring first edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. And so while he was talking about those books, I was starting to keep an eye out for writers and things from that period that had influenced the development of D&D. And I end up stumbling into a handful of Planet Stories magazines at this flea market booth, and I was like, "Oh, hey, I know several of these names. These are ones that Jeffro Johnson's been talking about."
Yeah,
And so I picked these up. I'm like, "Wow, this stuff's fantastic." And I was just like, surely there are people who are still wanting to write fiction like this these days, but what outlets do they have? And I figured the easiest way for me to find fiction like that that was contemporary was, if I provided the outlet, then the fiction could come to me. And
right,
so, when we started Cirsova magazine, it was kind of an homage to the classic pulps, particularly Planet Stories. But I took inspiration from stuff like thrilling wonder stories, startling stories, amazing, etc., etc.
right. So despite being influenced by all those, and this is it, I'm being 100% serious with this question as a fellow pulp fan and an owner of literally hundreds of all those magazines. Why is it not Cirsova stories? Why just Cirsova? Because that's unique. If you're throwing back to that pulp, man, everything's always got like a double punch title. Nothing's just hardly anything's just one word. Why just one word?
Well, that was the name of the blog. It was effectively my brand. It was something unique. Nobody else had ever used it. It's one of those unique made up words like Kodak that you can trademark it because no one else has ever used it for anything. And so, we started out as Cirsova magazine of heroic fantasy and science fiction, and we ran with that for about 10 issues across 3 years. And then I got tired of seeing so many bad elf stories and D&D knockoff stories that I was like, you know what, we're gonna rebrand as magazine of thrilling adventure and daring suspense,
I
which
love
made
it.
sense because we ended up with a lost Edgar Rice Burroughs story, which wasn't really heroic fantasy or science fiction, so it made perfect sense for us to rebrand with a Tarzan story.
Very cool. So now you mentioned a couple years. So how many issues of this have you actually produced, and how long have you been doing it?
We've been doing it since 2016, and including both runs and 3 specials, we've put out 27 issues of the magazine.
Fantastic. Damn, man. Congratulations. You're killing it. And you're just releasing your latest issue, which
Yeah,
is
this is
the summer 23 issue.
yeah, and it's number 15 of our second volume. So, like I said, we did 10 issues of heroic fantasy and science fiction. This is the 15th issue of thrilling adventure and daring suspense. Plus, we had 2 summer specials and 1 fall special.
Fantastic. So when somebody orders a copy of this, what can they expect on the inside? What are when you're or if there's an author out there and they want to submit a story, what is it that what's the content? What are you looking what's the meat inside the sandwich that you're looking to really get people to take a hold of?
I mean, exciting stories where things happen that matter. I mean, that's really what it boils down to.
So you're talking you're I guess so you're more hearkening back to an age of storytelling then from the sounds of it. You don't want somebody just sitting on a stone and being introspective. You want action. You want things to
Yeah,
occur.
no, no. I mean, we don't want the whole Campbell astounding type of story where you have a bunch of eggheads sitting around in a room thinking big thinks until one of them comes up with the solution to whatever problem that they've been discussing. That's not what we're looking for. We're not doing that kind of fiction. We want action, we want adventure, we want consequence, we want romance. We even have started delving a little bit into horror, but we're still, you know, the subtitle says it all: thrilling adventure, daring suspense.
Very good. Now, our good friend Raleigh here says Lester Dent's formula is helpful in this regard. Absolutely, it's something that's tragically been lost. Of like actually have your hero have go through costs and what does he have to figure out and face challenges. And as long as you follow that, you know, there's a narrative technique as an editor that I like to talk to authors about, where you'll have a scene and then they'll go and then and then they'll go to another scene, and I go no 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 that's you're that's not that's not action, that's just storytelling. You want action. You want to go here's a scene but and then create a barrier because that rises tension. Or you create after the but there's a result and then it's therefore. And as long as you're spacing out your scenes with therefore and but, your story's always going to be more engaging. But when you're causality going through it and it's always and then that and I we don't have any female listeners to my knowledge, but that's like your wife telling you a story that just does not fucking end, that you're getting way too much detail for. Like, you don't need to know what color of car the person that cut her off. That doesn't even factor into the story factors. It matters. You don't need that. Just tell me the facts and then let pace me through it and get to the action. Boom, 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 boom. I think that's kind of that's to me that's Lester Dent's formula kind of distilled down into something that's really simple and easy to grasp. Is just that formula that formulation. But when you're looking at these stories, I got to imagine, man, how many submissions are you getting for every issue? I mean, are you having to sort through a bunch of stories, or is it pretty?
Yeah, we actually cut our submission window down to about a week because I'm like, I can't manage the amount of submissions I'm getting. I don't have time to read them all. I definitely don't have space. I'm already getting more good stories than I have room or money to buy. So we are open for about a week a year, and in that time, we tend to get between 100 and 150 submissions.
Holy cow, man! That's impressive.
And
You're
we,
getting that many
yeah,
per issue.
we do the buying for an entire year. So out
Oh,
of
okay.
about 100 to 150 stories, we buy about 30 of them that we spread over our quarterly magazine.
Wow, that's awesome, man. So I guess what when you're looking at these magazines and you're assembling the stories, do you try to are they is each issue kind of themed, or is it are you just throwing stuff in there just to like this is a good story and this is a good story and it doesn't like I got Space Cowboy over here and I've got kind of Cthulhu detective over here.
Yeah, uh, when we have theme issues, it's usually because the theme tends to emerge among the stories that I like the best. So if I end up with several, sword and sorcery stories, I might put together a sword and sorcery issue. If I have a bunch of good kind of gothic horror stories that I get, I'll maybe put together a gothic horror issue. But it always really kind of depends on what we get.
So you're kind of just you're basing everything off of what the zeitgeist, what the wind blows in through your door.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and even when we do those theme kind of issues, a lot of times there'll be a couple stories that maybe don't really fit the genre, but we stuck them in there because we felt like it fit the tone.
Right. So you've moved away from bad R.A. Salvatore fanfic submissions. What else isn't allowed? What are you absolutely tired of seeing? Like I guess that's where I'm curious. Like, what is the constant submission that you just have to like tell people that you please write something else? Like we're done with this. I don't want to see another one of these stories for like 10 years.
Yeah, one of our hard and fast rules is no elf stories. Another hard and fast rule is no Lovecraft stories where you name drop mythos stuff.
Yes. God, I love you guys, man.
We've actually run several Lovecraftian stories. We had an entire Lovecraft themed sword and sorcery issue, but we still managed to follow the rule of no name dropping Lovecraft mythos heavies.
Right. Well, and I both apologize and am deeply deeply amused by my chat for asking this question. But how much of it is end table erotica?
Virtually none of it, if that's what I assume it is.
But so you're doing this great ode. What do you wish you'd see more of?
Oh man,
And you can't just say
sword.
good writing.
Well, that's the thing. We get a lot of good stories. Uh, the thing that I always love to see more of is 1930s, 40s style Sword and Planet. I always love seeing that stuff.
Okay, when you say sword and planet, just so we're on the same page, you're talking Flash Gordon post Ming's death,
Uh, kind
or
of,
John
I
Carter
guess.
from Mars.
I mean, John Carter, sure. Also, Lee Brackett, especially. She's
Okay,
probably one of my all-time favorite authors. Her stuff is amazing. If you haven't read it, you absolutely need to.
I guess elaborate a little bit on Lee Bragg. I mean, I can wax poetic, but nobody wants to hear me talk when you're here.
Oh
So.
man, her stuff is so based, man. But no, like her stuff is always, these grim, gritty kind of swordsman characters. She was a huge fan of Robert E. Howard, and she'd have the sultry dames in space, the grim swordsman, or the ray gun slinger. Her most famous creation probably is Eric John Stark, who was uh, one of the last major IPs that came out of the pulp era in the late 40s, early 50s with Planet Stories. She brought it back sometime in the 70s, I think, with her Scaife books, and that trilogy was a burning indictment of socialism. Imagine Atlas Shrugged, except the hero is sicking packs of psionic dogs on roving bands of hippies, tearing down the welfare state with his bare hands,
No,
all while
it's
space pirates are trying to make the good hardworking people and farmers give up the fruits of their labors to the roving bands of hippies who don't want to work.
Well, I think if if that's not a big enough reason for anybody to check out Bracket, I will add this. Two of her lifelong closest friends were Ray Bradbury and Robert Heinlein, and
Yeah, she
they
actually
they
did a
couldn't.
collaboration with Bradbury that is extremely blood and guts, and it is hard to tell where the Bradbury ends and the Bracket began.
Yep. But she is definitely a badass, and probably the closest, as Alex said, you will ever come to seeing I- John Galt wear a space helmet and kick some ass. So,
Yeah.
um, but yeah, it really probably one of the best to read some of her books. If you go to like the Internet Archive, you can find these. Planet Stories have an absolute treasure trove of her shorts, as well as some of her smaller serials. Highly recommend you check them all out, guys. Fantastic, fantastic callback there. Really appreciate that one. Always good to hear that name drop. So I guess as we kind of close out here, is there anything else you wanna talk about? You want to say about your magazine?
Yeah, so our big project right now is this anthology of strongman stories called The Mighty Sons of Hercules. It's an homage to a 60s syndication block where they took several of these peplum movies. A bunch of them were machiste movies, but a bunch were other unrelated movies. They dubbed them and gave them this kind of country western theme song, and they sold them in syndication packages to networks, and each movie was the adventures of a different son of Hercules. And so we wanted to pay homage to this series with an anthology where we tapped several of our top writers who we thought would be a really good fit for this and said, all right, give us either a trunk story or an original story, make it about a son of Hercules and the adventures that he goes on. The only rules were your guy had to be unquestionably good, he had to be a champion of justice to protect the weak, he had to be a son of Hercules, and he had to save the day. And so, we ended up with this anthology of just 8 amazing stories. Probably one of the highlights of it, we've got a novella from Mark Mellon of his Melkart character, who is a Phoenician warrior trader. We have original stories from uh, Misha Burnett, who's one of our regular authors, whose anthologies we publish. We've got a new story from Adrian Cole, who is a legend in his own right. He's been working on Sword and Sorcery, Sword and Planet stuff since the 70s, and he's been being published in our magazines. We've got a bunch of cool stuff in this upcoming project, and we hope that people will check it out.
Fantastic, man. Well, I know I wish you absolutely nothing but success, and you are welcome back anytime, man. I kind of feel already like we need to have like episode 2 once Sons of Hercules gets rolling here, where we just talk about Tarzan, because I had no idea you were a fellow Tarzan fan. So that is fantastic.
Yeah, yeah. We will be launching the Kickstarter at the beginning of July. Right now, you can sign up for notifications.
Awesome. Well, everybody needs to run out. Check out again in the description is a link to Cirsova's website where you can order Alex's magazine. And then also beneath that is a link to Sons of Hercules on Kickstarter. I just had it up. Go sign in. Make sure you click that notify me when this thing goes live so you can check it out. As always, sir, I'll allow my guest the last word. Do you have anything to close out?
Just thanks for having me. It was a great time. Good to chat with you.
Fantastic. Have a great night, all.
This is blood for blood and by the gallons. This is the old days and the bad days, the all or nothing days. They're back. There's no choices left.
You're still here? It's over. Go home.